When I was first getting into film, when I was a freshman in high school and I was in 8th grade, I would get excited when I would see two particular film logos at the beginning of a movie on cable or on videotape. And at that time there wasn't such a huge issue with rights and things like that the way there are now. So you had the original logos on home video and on cable. And it was two logos in particular. The Saul Bass Warner Brothers logo and the United Artists Transamerica Corporation logo. When I saw those, I knew I was going to be seeing something special, something exciting. In particular, with Warner Brothers, Woodstock was one of my favorite movies, being into music and being a young musician myself, and being into the 60s. United Artists was important to tie this into the Beatles, because they were the studio that brought us A Hard Day's Night, Help, Yellow Submarine, and Let It Be. But as I got into film and I got obsessed with film in hopes one day that I'd become a filmmaker myself, I realized that a lot more films came from United Artists, and I realized they had a different slant on things at United Artists. For instance, one of my favorite musicals, West Side Story, was with United Artists. Fiddler on the Roof was with United Artists. Two of my favorite musicals, especially film musicals. Now, I bring that up because you take a look at West Side Story, which came from United Artists, and then a couple years later, My Fair Lady at Warner Brothers. Two great films, both winning Best Picture and Best Director. But one was grounded in realism, granted a stylized realism, and one was pure romanticism. Both great and equally valid, and I love them both. And I would get excited when I would see that Transamerica logo especially. And when I became obsessed with Martin Scorsese, and Scorsese is to me in film what the Beatles are to me in music. And Martin Scorsese had 3 films at United Artists in the 70s. New York, New York, The Last Waltz, and Raging Bull. And it really got me obsessed with United Artists, and I wanted to really discover the history. So I read the books, and I read everything I could back then. United Artists to me was the studio that really focused on filmmakers, and focused on, maybe they weren't independent films because United Artists was a Hollywood studio, but they focused on independent visions. Who formed United Artists? 4 legends. Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith. And the idea of United Artists was to give film goers, or film directors rather, and filmmakers and writers a place to come for artistic freedom. United Artists had some ups, especially during that silent era. One of the best silent films ever, Buster Keaton's The General, was with United Artists. But they started to run into financial hard times there in the 40s. Until the 50s came. Sweet Smell of Success with Burt Lancaster. And then the 60s came. And in 1960 they swept the Oscars with Billy Wilder's The Apartment. And in 61 they cleaned up big with West Side Story. So then by the mid-60s the corporations started getting involved in Hollywood. Gulf and Western bought Paramount. Transamerica was like, oh, this United Artists company may be a good investment. So United Artists became a Transamerica company. And even with Transamerica, United Artists was still releasing films that I kind of thought were on the cutting edge. Midnight Cowboy. John Schlesinger's Midnight Cowboy with Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight. The first film to win Best Picture that was X-rated at the time. You had a group of films in the late 60s that shook Hollywood. Arthur Penn with Bonnie and Clyde at Warner Brothers. Sam Peckinpah at Warner Brothers with The Wild Bunch. Dennis Hopper with Easy Rider at Columbia. And here you have Midnight Cowboy at United Artists. Really shaking up the film industry. I mean, what other studio would have given Bernardo Bertolucci carte blanche for The Last Tango in Paris? And United Artists also was responsible for the James Bond series. I mean, just the caliber of films. And then Woody Allen had major successes with United Artists. In fact, to me, his great period is in the 70s, starting with Take the Money and Run, going up to Stardust Memories, which was his last film for United Artists. That great period of Woody Allen, I feel, when he just was making the transition from being a stand-up comedian to a filmmaker. I mean, United Artists, what studio would have given directors at that time the chance to work in black and white? Bob Fosse with Lenny. Woody Allen with Manhattan and Stardust Memories. Scorsese with Raging Bull. It was a studio that you can't compare what's going on nowadays. It was almost like, who's in it? How much is it going to cost? Fine. And they had big budget films. The James Bond series, even Raging Bull was big budget. Francis Ford Coppola brought Apocalypse Now. Domestically, it was released by United Artists. But then something happened to United Artists. A new set of executives came in, and they gave a green light to Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate. And Heaven's Gate cost $45 million. And critics were gunning for the film. I'm not going to go into the whole history of Heaven's Gate. Granted, I think it's a good film. I don't think it's a classic. I call it a flawed masterpiece. But I urge you to look up Heaven's Gate and what happened to United Artists as a result of Heaven's Gate. But $45 million for this huge, epic, revisionist Western, beautiful scenes, beautiful scenery, but somehow at the time didn't mesh together. Critics trashed it. I mean, they trashed it. And the film more than tanked at the box office. $45 million in 1979, 1980. Imagine how much that would be nowadays. Think about it. It was really only a blip on the Transamerica figures at the end of the year. But without Transamerica, what was United Artists going to do? Because United Artists took a big hit. Transamerica basically said, okay, we're done being in the film business. We're done dealing with you guys dealing with big-headed filmmakers that think they could take over the world. We want another Star Wars. Why don't you spend $45 million on another Star Wars? Look where we're at now, guys, in film. You have tentpole films every weekend. That's a different story. United Artists merged with MGM to become MGM UA. And they still had some major successes under the MGM UA heading. They still had the Rocky series, which was another Best Picture winner for United Artists. They had still the James Bond series. They won Best Picture in 1989 for Rain Man. And I was thinking about this because there was an interview with Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola that I have as a link here in the notes section if you want to take a look at it. That's from 1997, and both of them were talking about United Artists and how United Artists was that studio, and Miramax was not it. And even when I think nowadays, there's a lot of other independent studios, and a lot of studios have like separate entities within the studio for their, quote, independent films. But it was a different time then. And it's something that a lot of filmmakers nowadays, the filmmakers that I really admire, Wes Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson, David O. Russell, Chris Nolan has made it. You could give Chris Nolan $500 million to do a new version of War and Peace and it'll be fine. And he'll make it a box office hit. I don't know how he does it, but I think he's brilliant. But United Artists now exists only in name. It's changed hands over time, but still within the MGM UA entity. Tom Cruise brought a couple of films over there, but that deal went haywire. Now, Roma Downey with her husband, Mark Burnett, are at United Artists. And some of his reality television shows like Shark Tank, not Shark Tank, Shark Tank, I think that's what it's called, that is a part of United Artists. And Roma Downey wants to bring her biblical films there. But wouldn't it be great? I would just love to see that United Artists logo as a major logo again in film. And I wish somebody would really take a chance over there. Because, man, I'm getting tired of these, quote, tentpole films that they're releasing all the time. That is becoming the death of the film industry. Heck, when Steven Spielberg almost has to bring Lincoln to HBO, Spielberg, that's telling you something about the way Hollywood is going things on in the wrong way. And United Artists, when I think back about those films and the great films at United Artists, I'm wondering, where do we go wrong? Why is it Transformers or Transformers type of films every weekend? United Artists was always a favorite studio of mine, and a lot of my favorite filmmakers worked at United Artists. So United Artists is dear to my heart. And it's sad, being a film goer and a film buff, seeing that United Artists logo totally faded away. Hopefully that will change.